Chapter 11, Meetings. McQuinstorm Aaron. The meeting with the war generals did not end as planned. It was difficult to say that I had their full, unwavering support. At the onset, yes, I could say that, but now that their backs had turned and I could no longer hear what they were saying, I was not as confident. "Turan," I said. "I must have this discussion with you. Alone." The man regarded me and bowed slightly. When he did, I turned and started walking towards my chamber, with his footsteps keeping me company. The left side of the wall was almost entirely occupied by a fireplace. Fire roared to heat the room. Maidservants who were tending the fireplace immediately left upon our arrival. I sat at my throne and waited for Turan to be seated. His face bore no emotion, and I couldn't read into his feelings. Earlier, when I declared the Tree Runners' allegiance to the palace to the war generals, they were almost divided into factions. That declaration would have been in peril if not for my gift of charm. "Tell me your views about the Tree Runners," I said. Turan Aragar, my honorable advisor, usually did not offer opinions when they were unsolicited. He believed that no matter how good a piece of advice was, if it were unwarranted, it was just like a rotten egg, stinking and worth throwing away. "Why did you do it?" he asked. I thought I made that clear in the discussion. There were gray men, these ghosts that fought us in the palace yards not so long ago. "Nothing but cheaters," I said. "There were already rebellions all over Akea. The citizens are stirring because of what happened in the Akene wine festival," I said sternly. "Nobody understood your actions as an emperor. That is why the people are scared," he said simply. "You ordered a boy to die. And until now, you have not given an answer as to why you did it. There is still an ongoing order to deliver his body to you." His eyes watched me carefully, but he did not dare to question me anymore. "The Tree Runners can fight the ghosts." "These Tree Runners, have you seen them? They were covered with bark as though they have rawhide for skins. The war dog's teeth wouldn't sink into them. Swords may stand a far better chance on the battlefield. Arrows might work as well. But it was like the Tree Runners had armors for skin." Turan was shaking his head. "That's not what I don't understand." "Why now? For the longest time, you could keep the rebellions at bay without seeking help from anyone else. All 13 provinces bow to you. What are you afraid of?" I wanted to say that it was by Lamare Amark's assistance that I was able to hold back all the rebellions, but Turan would never understand. He also wouldn't understand that most of the uprisings in the past were ploys to make me appear as the hero. But the ones that were brewing now, I had no hand in them. Turan took out a pipe and lit it, blowing soft billows of smoke before talking again. "You know the history of the Tree Runners. To let them loose in Akea might endanger you even more. They are gentle creatures that were never meant to fight." "Perhaps they never would." He paused and changed his tone after noticing that my jaw hardened with what he said. "Forgive me, Your Grace, to be so blunt, talking as though we are equals. Please pardon me if my words are so bold." When I did not reply, he continued, "The Tree Runners were banished in Sinista, and there was a reason for that." "The death of the 7 lords," I said. Turan blew out another wispy smoke. "That's what we all knew. That's what the former emperor told everyone, but I, for one, do not take the former emperor to be a fool." "What do you mean?" I asked. I remember it clearly. 7 lords that were traveling to the Kanelan palace to join the Akene wine festival did not make it because the Tree Runners massacred them. "Sentenced without a fair trial," Turan interjected. "If there's one thing I was certain about Northsam Mendel Amark, it was that he wasn't a rash man. If he sentenced them to Sinista to spend all their days there, it wasn't because of a crime that was not publicly tried." I did not like what Turan was insinuating. Just think about it. The former emperor wouldn't blame the deaths on a clan without proof or trial, and yet he did. So, the question is, why? Did he sense that their presence in Akea freely would warrant any risk to his rule? And if the answer to that is yes, why? He was dead serious, and he made my head hurt. I massaged my temples as though to clear my thoughts, but it was how Turan had narrated it, sensical. Now that you set them free and with allegiance to Kanelan Palace, what are the repercussions? He said. It is preparation for battle, I said fiercely. Didn't you witness how the ghosts slaughtered soldiers in the palace yards? Turan flinched. My dear Emperor, weren't they provoked? I stood up, and the chair I was sitting on fell heavily to the marble floor. I thumped my fists on the table and leered at Turan. If you don't believe in how I run things, then say it to my face. Do not puzzle me with your riddles. I am not to be toyed with. My ears were throbbing, and I could feel my pulse racing. Turan's face flushed. Your Grace, it was not my intention. Just tell me what you think. I yelled. My body was shaking as I tried to control myself. The windows slammed open as gusts of wind entered the room. I realized that a storm could be brewing outside as a response to my emotions. I breathed deeply to slowly calm myself. I found myself wishing for Saul's presence because the woman could control my rage. Your Grace, I am sure that you have heard the story of the tree runners and how it was linked to the last great black egg, he said. His voice remained calm, but I noted that it had gone a tad softer. The dragon, I said blandly. The last great black egg is believed to be in the custody of the tree runners. Lucrin, the descendant of King Aram of Karasthea, cursed that peace would be broken once the last great black egg was released upon the land. The ship that Lucrin's daughter was on capsized. She was thought to have drowned, but underwater maidens cared for her. It was said that she lived in the ocean. This daughter had a lover who went on to search for her, and when he did and learned about the egg, he dreamed of ruling the world the way King Aram once did. But Lucrin's daughter knew this was not to be, so when her lover stole the egg, the maiden went after him. Unaccustomed to the land, she fell ill and cursed her lover. She whispered her curse to the trees, the lover would become slow, and his powers would be limited to rearing the trees. And he would never rule Akea. Hence, Turan paused. The birth of the tree runners. I will use the tree runners in war as I intend to. Dragons, eh? I said, considering. Somehow, my breathing had abated. If this is true, I can get a hold of it. Legends. Myths. Folklore. Call it whatever you want, but what I'm saying is that tree runners were not made for battle. While it is true that their skins were like armor, their skills were not for fighting. They were not even faithful. Their very existence defines treachery, Turan said. There were so many things about my rule that are difficult to understand. I know that. However, that doesn't give you or anyone the right to question my decisions. I have ascended to power on my own. I have no birthright. I paused, afraid that I had revealed too much. Sometimes, I forget that nobody knew about who Lamare Amark was and her association with me and the former emperor. Turan's eyes watched me, trying to measure me. It was a slip. I should be more careful from now on, especially with him. This is what I plan to do. Listen, Turan, I said, unnerved nonetheless. The boy must die. The ghosts must die. Any dissenting faction must be eradicated. If I need to start a war in one of the provinces of Akea, I will do so to ensure that people fear me and that they wouldn't think of rising against me. Now, do you have any questions? Turan Aragor sat silently, staring at me for a little while longer before slowly shaking his head. Whatever I say may be taken against me. But Your Highness, I beg you to reconsider. The tree runners should probably just stay in Sinista. Not out here. He stood and bowed down before adding, May I take my leave, Your Grace? Amen arose. Her condition has not changed much, I said. The fever had gotten worse, which I suspect could have come from the wounds. Our hands were not tender enough for the task of cleaning these wounds. Cito smirked as though he abhorred being here with us. He was sitting with his knees close to his chest. It was an odd sight, a tree runner seated like that. He was just too bulky to be able to remain in that position. His eyes were cast somewhere far away. If you want to return to Sinista, Kokoros and I will not stop you, I said. We understand if you want to go home. Sito shook his head. Nothing is there for me anymore. It had been weeks. They've probably already branded me a traitor. His scowl had gone fiercer as though he hated the word traitor. His hair had gone an odd shade of brown some moon turns ago. It was now the color of dried leaves. He was indeed getting older. His head snapped towards me, and he peered at the woman. Is there any chance she could be waking up soon? I shrugged my shoulders. I'm doing my best, I said. I was not accustomed to not sleeping in trees. Since we were banished to Sinista, that was how we always slept, a defense mechanism of sorts to avoid everyone. It was the same for all three of us. Sleeping under the naked sky was new to us, and we hardly got any sleep. It was like lying unprotected from anyone in Akea. It was not a nice feeling. I continued checking the woman's wounds. She must regain her strength, I whispered. She must. Kokoro startled me from behind. When she's well, do we leave her then? Must we? Or do we protect her? I asked. Sito's chuckled while shaking his head. Why must we offer our protection to her? The Emperor banished us, and this woman was being chased by the Emperor's general. That is a parallel, true, but it doesn't mean that we have to protect the enemies of the Emperor too. I am certain that the similarities do not end there, I said. I met Sito's stare, and his eyes shadowed for a moment before looking away. She is the mother, Kokoro said. I nodded. Yes. That's why the boy asked us to help her. Sometimes, I find myself at odds with what we did. What do you mean? It was Sito's. Maybe it was the boy we should have protected, I said. The soldiers went after him. He wanted to be a decoy to save his mother, but what if she wasn't really in danger, to begin with? What if, I paused. What if it was the mother who acted as the decoy so that the boy could escape? And now, we've ruined it for them. Sito stood up and sat beside me, watching the woman for any movement. His stare outlined her face as though he was trying to unearth a memory. She reminds me of someone, he said. Someone who I wasn't sure existed, or if she was just a yearning at the back of my head. Do you understand what I mean? Sito's asked. I shook my head. Not really, no. You have lived long years, maybe way too long. I think that is the reason why memories were coming back to you. You were having difficulties thinking about who this woman reminds you of. The woman stirred in her sleep, and her eyes fluttered open, but they shut so quickly again before a moan escaped her lips. We must bring her somewhere else. Village people. She must live. Otherwise, the boy's sacrifice would go to waste, I said. Kokoro's nodded before he pulled the makeshift plank that he had made. We carried the woman on top of the plank. I took the far end with a grunt, and we started moving with Kokoro supporting the other side. Beside us, Sito's was walking as though his feet had grown roots. His shoulders sagged as he walked. Miroe Pasap. It's you. Mayo Calo shouted. Of all the rotten luck. I could have ended up in the dungeon with practically anyone, and instead, it had to be the fat boy who accused my twin and me of lying. Mayo's eyes were still bulging as though he had not recovered from the shock of seeing me. Good that you're here. You should have been here a long time ago. Before you had the chance to kill Arden. He yelled. His cheeks, which used to be plump, had gotten a little thinner. It was not a surprise given the quality of food that was probably served here. You can't fool anyone anymore. He said. No one will ever believe you. You're a liar and a murderer, and all the bad things rolled into one. I hope you rot here forever. His face was flushed even in the darkness. He continued in a softer voice, but I hope I don't rot here with you. I turned away from him, walked back to my bunk, and sat down. I was in no mood to converse with anyone. I needed my alone time, so I could think of how to escape. Wait for a guard to walk past me. Lure him to come closer to me. Make sure that he has the keys to my cell. Then when he is close enough, squish his heart so he would fall helplessly to the ground. Grapple him to get the keys and escape. That would have been a good plan, except I knew it could not be that simple. There were always loopholes and things that were bound to go wrong if I did not think my steps through. That was why I needed my solitude. Fat luck that I ended up with Mayo. All I had to do was drone out his voice with my thoughts. I laid down and planned my escape. What were the other things that I could do? How would I be able to go to the Emperor sooner? It was not as simple as I had thought it would be. When I started on the journey, I thought reaching Kanelan would be the challenge. And that from there, I could walk my way through to meet the Emperor. I thought that once I showed him what I was capable of, there was no doubt that he would take me in as his ally. But this. I looked around, peering in the darkness. The light flickered from a distance as night attempted to swallow the lone ray that lit the hallway. This was not part of the plan. Never have I thought that I would end up in this hellhole. Some faint footsteps broke the silence. Mayo had stopped talking as though he was also listening, waiting for whoever the source of those footsteps to pass by our cells. There was loud clanging as Mayo thumped the steel bars barricading his cell. "Help me! Let me out!" he shouted. "Please, let me out and let me see my father." Ha! That little otter had a father. Big surprise. And for him to shout and beg the soldiers to take him to see his father was very him, a coward who always wanted an easy way out. He should just rot in this dungeon for all I care. I turned to my side. Weariness had caught up with me. I felt my eyelids getting heavier as I began to lose consciousness. "Hey! Let me out!" Mayo shouted even louder this time. His pleas jolted me from slumber. I snorted loudly in annoyance. "Go back to sleep," a hoarse voice said. "Dangerous criminals are not allowed outside." "Please," Mayo begged. "I cannot last one more day in this dungeon. This cell is filled with rats." Then, a loud thud rang in my ears. I sat up quickly and peered to see that Mayo was lying on the ground, clutching his shoulder. His face was broken, and he was attempting to stifle a cry. The soldier chuckled before turning away. I watched as Mayo nursed his shoulder. His footsteps were heavy as he walked back to his bunk and slid sideways. Not even the shadows hid the heaving of his shoulders as he started to sob. I sighed. Mayo was definitely at the top of my long list of hated persons, but I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He was a child, after all. One who was so blunt with his words. One who would be so self-absorbed that he would, most of the time, disregard everyone around him just to get what he wanted, and yet, the sound of his sobbing bothered me. "What did you do?" I asked before I could stop myself. To my surprise, Mayo yelped. Then he bolted up, his arms crossed over his head as though he was hiding from me. "Don't attack me!" he shrieked. He kept yelling, and some prisoners began pounding on their steel bars, shouting at us, obviously annoyed. The cacophony mixed with the bantering and curses from the other prisoners made my eardrums throb. "Quiet, Mayo!" I yelled on top of all the commotion. Mayo hiccuped, but I could still hear his sobs. I shut my eyes as an ache started to build inside my head. My body was tired from the long journey. I soon fell into a deep sleep. Even Mayo's quivering moans lulled me to sleep. My stomach was growling when I awakened. My eyes adjusted to the darkness for a moment. I stood up, looking for something to eat. Even rats would have been good enough for me at this point. I noticed a metal food tray before me. I quickly grabbed it and gobbled whatever was on it. I could barely see the food and hardly tasted what I was eating. All I knew was that when I finished, whatever was in that tray had satisfied my hunger. The dungeon was alarmingly quiet save for echoes created by dripping water somewhere. How long has it been since I was brought here? Time seemed to move slowly here. I understood why Mayo had been pleading with the guards to release him. Anyone can lose their mind here. My eyes jerked toward Mayo's cell. Even in the darkness, I could see his face pressed against the steel bars while his hands gripped them. His eyes, now fixed on me, were no longer bulging from surprise or fear but rather quizzical and somewhat confused. "Miroe?" he said softly. His voice held reservations. I didn't dare move. Now I understood why he was so baffled earlier. He had not known that I was only pretending to be slow in the head before, and he was caught off guard when I addressed a common question to him earlier. "Miroe?" He called out again. His voice had gone a little louder this time. I cocked my head, staring him straight in the eye. This seemed to alert him. He jumped back, his head popping back from between the steel bars. "Do you know how to speak now?" he asked. I looked away. Mayo was not my favorite person. He was irksome, and that was putting it gently. "Didn't you ask me a question?" he paused, "like a day ago?" I dropped onto my bunk and chose to ignore him. This was beyond torture. Sure, the dungeon was worse than I expected, but being locked in here with Mayo made it even worse. I turned sideways and covered my ears to shut him out. It worked. Mayo eventually stopped talking. I wondered what had happened to my twin. Goemi's face immediately formed inside my head, and my heart became tender at remembering her. She was my only family. And then there was Nia, the woman we rescued who treated me like I was her son. I was grateful to her for a while for making me feel the motherly love that I never received. But then things went out of hand, and Nia soon became another faded memory inside my head. When I left them all in Sinista, they were still together. Mayo, Quila, Goemi, Kino, and Nia. What could have happened that ended with Mayo being thrown into the Kanelan Dungeons? If he was here, was there any chance that Goemi would be next? My heart skipped at the thought. I got up so quickly that my head throbbed. At an instant, I was gaping back at Mayo. He was watching me with tearful eyes. "Is Goemi," my voice broke as my heartbeat pounded, "here with you?" Mayo's eyes grew large, but although he seemed surprised by my question, he tried hard not to show it. "I'm here alone," he said. His lips trembled. "Where is she?" My heart was beating faster. "I don't know," Mayo said. "I don't know what happened. We couldn't get out of Sinista. We were just going around in circles when suddenly, there was this sound of approaching footsteps, and I saw the general's men riding horses. I shouted to alarm the group, but the general saw me, and he caught me so easily." His voice faltered and softened at the same time. The next time I awoke, I was riding with the general. Goemi wasn't there. Quila was gone. Pyper, Kino, and, he paused, and his eyes narrowed at me, Mistress Lamare were also gone. He stressed Mistress Lamare to tell me he was still standing by his claim that Nia Pasap was indeed Mistress Lamare Amark. I decided to let it go. Now that I was apart from them, I didn't see any reason to argue about it. "My twin sister was gone?" I asked, shock coating my voice. "And you don't even know if they're together?" Mayo shook his head. The general thumped my head so hard. "It's not like I didn't try to save them, but it's just that I wasn't given a chance to. But I hope that they heard me. I hope I gave them a fair amount of warning. This is bad. When I left Goemi, it was because I knew she would be cared for. But to hear this from Mayo, him telling me that Goemi could be in danger." I shut my eyes. What was I thinking, leaving her behind? If I had been there, all it would have taken was for me to grasp the general's heart inside my head, and he would have been dead. "Arg!" I grunted. I turned to the wall and punched it multiple times, making it pay for endangering Goemi. I kicked at it, too, when my fists started bleeding. My face burned as the sting of my hands made its presence felt. I wanted to shout. "Stop it!" Mayo shouted. "If you want to rescue her, the first thing we have to do is to escape." I turned to Mayo, my eyes in slits. "If I escape this dungeon, what makes you think that I would bring you with me? You have done nothing but spite me. You're the most annoying Akeen I know. I would only take you with me for the fun of squishing your heart once you bore me." I was so mad that I didn't dare filter my words. Mayo jumped back so quickly and into his bunk that it almost seemed funny. However, I wasn't finished yet. "After making my life miserable with all your claims that Nia was Lamare, do you really expect that being stuck here in this dungeon would make me take kindly towards you? I hissed. I started to pant uncontrollably and realized that I should have stopped earlier. The shadows swallowed Mayo's figure as he kept pressing against the wall in a vain attempt to get as far away from me as possible. I went back to my bunk and sat with a loud thud. I had to think. Weigh things more. Goemi's safety changed everything. I came here to form an alliance with the Emperor, but that was before I learned that my twin could be in danger. And yet, what if she turned her back on me? Or was it I who left her alone? It was not so long ago, yet the memories had gone murky. My heart clenched in loneliness, and I tried holding back my tears. "Bubba," I whispered, calling out to my twin. "Do you need me?" But Goemi let Arden come between us. That was an act of betrayal. Goemi may replace me with someone else in the future. So, I must not search for her. This time, I must only look out for myself. Mayo Calo. I tiptoed to the edge of my cell to get to my food tray, and even when I was picking it up from the floor, I made sure that I would not make any sound. I glanced at Miroe's cell and could only make out his form on his bunk. He had not moved in hours. I could only guess that he had fallen asleep. What was I thinking approaching him like that? Even though steel bars separated us, I reminded myself that all Miroe had to do was think about killing me, and it would happen. Distance didn't mean anything to him when it came to his power. A chill ran down my spine at the ghastly thought. But the soldiers guarding this dungeon said they were making Miroe drink herbs, which should prevent him from killing me. There's no reason for me to be frightened then. Regardless, I had to focus on my escape. Every day, I tried thinking about multiple ways of escaping. Was there any way to trick these guards? Was there any power that could help anyone escape the dungeons? If I had invisibility, would it have made any difference? I winced when I made a sound as I sat on my bunk and craned my neck to see if I had disturbed Miroe's sleep. He was still on his back, still as a rock. Porridge stared at me. It looked so bland that even before I tasted it, I knew I ate it only to keep myself alive. There was no delight in consuming it. None whatsoever. Why would I even want to join Miroe in his escape? My grandma always said there was some good in everyone, and maybe, no matter how rotten Miroe had become, there was still some good in him. A little part that I could help grow. Hopefully. I should be prepared in any case. If Miroe doesn't want to take me with him, I should probably just beg him to let me out of the cell. From there, I could go my own way. I would retrieve the registry of citizens and find out who Kino's father was, discover Mistress Lamare's power, and find out if Kino was Kratty royalty. Northsam Mendel Amark. Sea spray was everywhere as the waves hit the bank. Men reached out to take the boy from me, but I refused. Instead, I pointed to the baggage that I had brought. "No need to help me with the boy. But my baggage is still on the deck," I said. "If you must." The man nodded before hoisting himself up on the boat, splashing some more water on me. I glanced at Kino. There were beads of sweat on his forehead, and his body was damp against mine. The fever had broken, and with some rest, he would be well enough and hopefully regain his strength. I trudged on the water as waves kept whipping me. A big one came splashing and I swayed as the water took Kino and me under. I reached out to a hand, thankful that one of the oarsmen was near the bank. He extended a hand and grabbed me. We sat on the sand with a loud thud. Kino stirred. His brows furrowed, and his eyes opened slightly, but the sunlight could have been too much for him. I coughed and turned sideways toward him, gathering my grandson in my arms. There was a cottage near the waters, and we could rest there. The oarsman was still waiting for me by the shore, and he escorted us to the cottage. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Sand covered everything, and a faint scent of burnt fish hung in the air. It was burlioke, a fish with bright orange meat. It would serve well as a meal. My mouth began to water. "There's a mattress where you can lay him down," the oarsman said, pointing inside. I saw the mattress and put Kino down. "Some dry clothes," I said. The oarsman handed me a dry piece of cloth, which I used on Kino's hair. He was still dripping wet, like me. I removed Kino's clothes and pat-dried him. "There's a blanket, Elder," the oarsman said. "Thank you," I said as I unrolled the blanket he passed me and used it to cover Kino. The boy's hair was slick, but it would dry immediately in this weather. Gusts of wind kept blowing inside the cottage. "When you're ready, just send me a word. I will have someone prepare your dinner," the oarsman said. I nodded at the kindly man, suddenly oblivious of my growling stomach. "How about the healer?" I asked. "Were you able to find one?" "Not in another 3 days. I was told that a healer would visit the islands, but we must wait and see." 3 days would be good enough. Kino's fever was almost gone, and a good night's sleep was what he needed now. I examined the wound on his leg and noted that it had been healing fairly well. There was no more pus. When the healer arrives, it would just be to confirm that Kino has healed completely. "It's all right. I heard about the dearth of healers in the provinces," I said. "They were summoned to Kanelan." When all was settled in the evening, I walked outside the cottage and stared at the already waning sun. The moons could be seen visibly on the horizon, and as though by their bidding, the waves crashed heavily into the shore. Gusts of wind disheveled my hair. "I was told of your arrival, Elder," a deep voice regarded me. I need not turn around to find that Elder Sika was the source of that voice. It took me some time to finally get a hold of the boy. And perhaps, just in the nick of time. I turned to face Sika. Creases of old age hardly touched his face, but his short-cropped hair was already graying. "Your grandson?" he asked. "He is," I said. "His training must begin as soon as he is well. The future of Akea rests on his shoulders now." A heavy burden for such a young boy, Sika sighed. "And yet, the gods could only get worse." I paused, my eyebrows rising. "Have you gotten word of where the seer could be now?" I asked, wondering where Micromania could have been. When last we spoke, she promised she would look for the boy, but having stumps for limbs could significantly slow her down. Sika's eyes rounded in surprise. "She's been here for about a fortnight now, Elder. She said that you would be here before the moon turns." I chuckled, shaking my head. Micromania might have sensed it when I reached Kino and decided to head straight to Lakay Islands before we did. "Would you like me to send for her?" Sika asked. "There is no need. I will be the one to pay her a visit," I said, staring back at the horizon and wondering if it was too late to see her. Perhaps not, given that my purpose of seeing her takes precedence over some protocol about evening visits. "I will hold an elder meeting tomorrow, Elder Sika," I said. "Please send a message to everyone. It might be a little too abrupt, but we have to act fast. Things have gotten out of control since the Akeen Wine Festival. I had heard the news about so many things that it would be foolish to take things slowly. My daughter lives. That came as a surprise to me. I had always thought that the prophecies meant she would perish before Kino's power could be unleashed. There must be something that happened between the time I was gone until now that I was not privy to. All the more reason that I must find her too. No seer had ever predicted everything with such accuracy. Not even Micromania. And she had trivialized everything when she said that out of the Nivan blood, Akea would rise again. While it was confirmed that Nivens did survive, it was still surprising that Nivan lineage would save Akea. Who among them would save Akea? I asked myself how it intertwined with Kino's life. News about the Akeen Wine Festival declared that Kino became invisible when he was ordered by the Emperor to be slain. How that happened remains a mystery. From what I know of shuffling, it was not akin to invisibility, unless Kino had been with people who could make themselves invisible. This could be the reason why he was able to manifest that power. Such an intricate web he has managed to get himself entangled in. To meet and be with a Nivan. What a curious thought. My head began to throb as I got lost in thoughts spiraling inside my head. Since I had stopped being the Emperor, I got frequent headaches that became more savage as I got older. There were a lot of things that I didn't understand anymore after I abdicated the throne. Much that I should catch up on. Much that I must do. It is you, as I had hoped, Micromania said as soon as I entered her cottage. She was still the same woman I had worked with many moon turns ago. Recently, she had become a part of my life again as matters of pressing concern came to her. Issues that involved my grandson and the fate of Akeens. I had wanted to reach you sooner, but it was a difficult journey for me, I began. When you said something about where it all started, I thought it might be Nivadan or here on these islands. It was only by happenstance that I chanced upon Sinista. A faint smile split Microm's lips. The woman was a seer. During my reign as the Emperor of Akea, I had always listened to her prophecies and filtered out which ones would serve my rule and which ones I had no use for. Oh, was it? She said in an amused tone. Don't play games with me. I know you knew which province I would find my grandson in. I would have greatly appreciated it if you had told me earlier. I could have avoided a few things and changed how events turned out, I said. You do realize that was exactly why I kept the location hidden from you, she said. Had you known, you would have done something differently that would have caused even more complications, more disturbing than they already are. Perhaps come earlier to take your daughter. I heaved deeply. I understand. As always, I must never meddle with destiny. Microm pointed to the chair that was right in front of her. Only a desk separated us. Where is the boy? She asked. You will meet him tomorrow. He is indisposed at the moment. The journey has not been easy, and he was still recovering from a fever. I am not exactly sure how he was relevant to the prophecy when it clearly stated that from the Nivan heritage, the land would be saved. It may just confuse the boy. Microm gave me a quizzical look. Do you not question the prophecy, Your Highness? It is quite confusing, yes. But I do wish to understand why Kino, who is not of Nivan blood, was still identified by the Emperor as a threat. I knew then that a long conversation was in store for the night.